Now, before they went into the promised land, before they crossed the Jordan, Joshua sent some spies into the land, just as Moses had done 40 years prior. This time the spies came back, and they didn't say that the Canaanites were too big for us to conquer, but rather they said, the Canaanites fear us. The Canaanites are afraid of us because of our God, Yahweh, who always seems to be on our side. And so as they came back, they said, the Canaanites fear us, but they think they're safe now because the Jordan River is at flood stage. Because the Jordan River is so high and there's no way for us to get across. So right now the Canaanites feel like they're safe. Now, the Jordan River flowed from the foot of Mount Hermon to the Sea of Galilee, and from the Sea of Galilee on down to the Dead Sea. The word Jordan means descended. It descended from Mount Hermon all the way down to the Dead Sea, and from Mount Hermon to the Sea of Galilee, it descended 9,000 feet, and then below the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea, it descended down to 1,400 feet below sea level. What that means is, in a matter of 90 miles, as the bird flies, the Jordan River descends 10,400 feet. Now that's a pretty steep descent for a river, and a river that descends that far moves very quickly. Now today, if you would see the Jordan River, it doesn't move nearly as fast, but that's because there's hydroelectric plants and dams that control the flow of the water. But at this time, the flow of the Jordan River was so rapid, it was one of the fastest moving rivers in all of the world. Now, the Jordan River is not as wide as the Mississippi. Actually, the Jordan River isn't even as wide as the Wabash. But when it was at flood stage, it would have been very difficult to cross. And God's instructions to the priests were that they were to go to the edge of the river and they were to step in. And God would then hold back the water. Now, remember when they went to the Red Sea, Moses raised his staff and the Red Sea parted, and after the sea parted, they walked through on dry land. Well, remember we talked a couple weeks ago how God doesn't do the same thing twice? You know, when it came to crossing the Jordan River, it wasn't an issue that God stopped the water for them to walk across, but God said, this time you need to trust me. This time you need to have faith, and you take a step into the water, and then I'll stop it. Now, stepping out into the water was no easy task either, because it would not have been a gentle slope like walking in the beach down into a lake or out into the ocean that has a gradual descent. But with such a rapidly running river, it would cut deep into the banks on the side. And when you step into the river, it wasn't a gentle slope, but it was several feet straight down. So there was no turning back. When the priest stepped into the water, it wasn't an issue of taking a small step in and then deciding whether to step back. It was a decision to go all or nothing. A step of faith. Did they trust God or did they not? And it was at that point that they took a step into the water and trusting God that He then stopped the water. You know, as I've just told you a rather long story in terms of a piece of Israel's history, although it's a long story but a very abridged version. What does it mean? What does this story have to do with us today? Well, the Jordan River was a barrier that had to be crossed. Just like coming out of Egypt, fleeing slavery was a barrier that the children of Israel had to cross. Just like the Red Sea was a barrier that they had to cross. Now the barrier facing the children of Israel is the Jordan River. God made it clear that they were to go into the promised land and that they were to get there by the priests stepping into the water, you know, with the Ark of the Covenant. But in order to get into that promised land, they must cross a barrier. They must move through the river. And the way they got to that promised land was to take a step of faith. What are the barriers in your life? What are the barriers in your life that keep you from being and doing what God wants you to do? I don't have time to help those in need because my schedule is just too full. I need to learn more. I need to be taught more. I need to get more training before I can talk to someone about my faith. Now, I can barely get by financially now, and so how could I possibly afford to give to the church, let alone tithe 10% of my income? What are those barriers that you're faced with in your life? I don't know how God's challenging you right now, but in whatever way God is challenging you, what I'm also pretty sure of is that there's some barrier there as well. Not a barrier that God puts in place, but a barrier that we put in place of saying, well, God, I really can't trust you. I really can't take this step. Often what happens when we face a barrier as it relates to taking a step of faith, it's an issue that we face that barrier, and what grips us is doubt. What grips us is fear. But God invites us to take a step of faith. During my senior year in college, I was president of a group at Indiana University called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. It was a Christian organization that we would meet on Thursday nights for a time of worship, for a time of teaching, a time of fellowship together. And so as I was president of that organization in my senior year, I really believed that God was leading me to always be there at all the meetings on Thursday nights. But I had a problem. And that problem was I was also in IU's pep band that played at basketball games. And at that time, most of the basketball games were either on Thursday night or were on Saturday. Now, the Saturday games weren't a problem for me, but the Thursday night games were a problem. And as I came to the beginning of that season, I really wanted to be in the pep band, but I believed that if I was going to miss all the Thursday night home games, that the director probably would not allow me to be in the pep band. But I really sensed what God wanted me to do, so I went and talked with the band director. And when I went and talked with Mr. England, he agreed that I could miss all the Thursday evening home games. It was not the answer that I was expecting at all, but yet as I trusted God in the process of trying to do what was right in terms of bringing leadership, being in InterVarsity, but also doing the things that I wanted, God allowed me to be able to do both. And I really believe that God kind of softened his heart at that point when I went in and talked with him. God, as I was responding to God's leading, God also took down a barrier which brought fear and uncertainty to me. God invites us to trust him even in the face of what seems to be impossible to us.